Why would an Israeli-Canadian woman be forced to put Palestine as her birthplace on a Canadian passport? Is Israel more of a threat to the Middle East than Iran? Did Israel commit international war crimes? And does a prophetic biblical passage foretell the events of October 7th? Could the Deputy Foreign Minister be the one to deliver such a message? Plus, Andrew Tucker of Thinc joins us later in the show. Stay tuned for all this and more in this week's edition of Israel Matters. I'm your host, Stephen Briggs. Well, a Canadian-Israeli woman was denied the option to put Israel as place of birth in her new passport this week. According to her video, the employee told this Canadian-Israeli woman that the new Canadian policy was to write Palestine under certain Israeli cities on place of birth after the recognition of Palestine by Canadian leader Mark Carney. Let's watch Anastasia Zorchinsky tell her alarming story in her own words.
I became a Canadian citizen and I decided to, of course, get my Canadian passport. And I went this Monday to the application center to submit all of my documents. And as you know, you have to write your birth city and your also your country of birth. So I wrote Kfar Saba, Israel. So as I submit my documents to the lady working at the desk, she looks at them, everything looks fine. And then she says, unfortunately, we cannot write Israel on your passport. So I ask her why. And she says it's because of the political conflict. So we can only write Kfar Saba, which is the city of birth, and we cannot write Israel on your passport. So at that point, I'm very confused, and I try to understand how this is even true. So I asked her, if there was any other country written as my birth country and not Israel, would you be able to put it there? So it's only because I said my country of birth is Israel that you cannot write it in my passport, and she says yes. Then I asked her to show me the policy where it says that, because I really doubted that it was a true policy. And she comes back after 5 minutes with another colleague, and her colleague tells me that actually, since Kfar Saba is in Israel, we can write Israel on your passport. However, since Mark Carney declared a Palestinian state, many cities are now considered as Palestine. So I asked him what are those cities? He says Ramallah, Jenin, Nablus, Jerusalem. So at that point, I'm very confused, and I ask him, so now people can write Palestine on their passport, and those cities are considered as Palestine, and he says yes. So clearly, I was under some political influence because of who I am and where I was born, while just fulfilling my right as a citizen to get a Canadian passport.
Well, Zorchinsky's attorney, Neil Oberman, said the following on X about the situation. No law supports this. No regulation authorizes it. No democracy should tolerate it. Passports are not political documents. They are instruments of identity and equality before the state. When administrative discretion crosses into discrimination, the rule of law itself is fractured. Canada must do better. Zorchinsky said, I'll keep using my voice to defend democratic values that protect all of us, freedom, dignity, and fairness, and to push back in every way I can against the injustices that try to silence them. If you're listening to this program and you live in Canada, this should be a wake-up call that you need to take immediate action. Contact your elected representatives and let them know that this is unacceptable. And of course, let's all be praying that the growing tide of anti-Semitism in Canada would be reversed. This passport situation, with the staff refusing to write Israel, Zion, as the birthplace, reminds me of this verse, actually. Psalm 87, verse 6. The Lord will write in the register of the peoples, this one was born in Zion. Even if Canada is ashamed of Zion as a birthplace, the Lord is not ashamed of Zion. He describes it as his inheritance and his holy hill. If you missed last week's episode of Israel Matters, we delved deeply into this, as Tucker Carlson had called it a brain virus to be one who is a Zionist, a Christian Zionist, and that it was the people group that he hates the most in all of the world. So don't miss that. Go back and listen to that and watch that. It was very, very insightful. Well, in other news this week, President Trump met with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to sign a series of diplomatic agreements, including the future sale of F-35 stealth fighter jets to the Gulf state. In an official statement, the White House said Saudi Arabia had increased its investments in the US to $1 trillion, up from the $600 billion it had promised during Trump's May visit. The Crown Prince did not provide a timeline for the investment or any details on what it would include. Reportedly, he discussed joining the Abraham Accords, meaning normalization with Israel, but insists that the two-state solution remains on the table. There are a number of different agreements that were signed in various fields, and I want to read those out to you following the visit of the Saudi Crown Prince to Washington. Number one, Saudi Arabia will invest $1 trillion in infrastructure, industry, and technology. Two, a strategic defense agreement was signed between the US and Saudi Arabia. Three, arms deals. Saudi Arabia is purchasing from the US F-35 aircraft and 300 Abrams tanks. 4, an agreement for nuclear cooperation for civilian purposes under a strict standard of non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. 5, strategic minerals agreement, cooperation and coordination of national strategies. 6, a memorandum of understanding was signed on artificial intelligence, granting Saudi Arabia access to American artificial intelligence technology. 7, an agreement to expand commercial and regulatory operations, cooperation I might add in that as well. And 8, a financial cooperation agreement between the countries' finance ministries in the fields of customs, standards, and capital market regulation. Saudi Arabia's status and power have risen a notch in the past 24 hours because Trump has made sure to highlight this and gives his dear guest all the honors that money can buy in the Middle East, and they definitely understand what this means. Personally, I think this feels very risky to give Saudi Arabia the air power that would match Israel's, and forcing Israel's hand to give away land for peace has always backfired on Israel. Israel needs to make biblically based decisions, not decisions made under duress by American or other international pressures to divide God's land. Joel 3:1 and 2 says, "In those days and at that time, when I restore the fortunes of Judah and Jerusalem, I will gather all nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat." That means the valley of God's judgment. "And there I will put them on trial for what they did to my inheritance, my people Israel, because they scattered my people among the nations and divided up my land." Gaza is a prime and tragic example of what the Palestinians do when they are given land in Israel to govern themselves. Gaza could have been the Singapore of the Middle East, but instead they created a launching pad for terror. In related news, violence and tensions continue in the Holy Land, with a tragic stabbing and ramming attack at Gush Etzion Junction this past Tuesday. Sadly, 1 man was killed and 3 were injured. Thankfully, the pipe bomb inside the terrorist car did not go off as he had planned, as the death toll would have no doubt been much higher if it had. So we thank God for that protection and pray for the grieving and hurting families. Psalm 34, verse 18 reads, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." This verse offers comfort by assuring us that God is near to those who are in pain and sorrow. And in news items that are equally absurd as they are distressing, the JNS reported that members of the Oxford Union, the world's best-known debating society at Oxford University, last week voted in favor of a motion that called Israel a greater destabilizer than Iran. The Oxford Union on Thursday voted overwhelmingly in favor of a motion declaring Israel a greater threat to regional stability than Iran, following a debate between Hillel Neuer, the director of UN Watch, and Mohammed Shtayyeh, a former Palestinian Authority prime minister, the Jewish Chronicle reported. Shtayyeh said that Israel was guilty of engaging in a brutal occupation, crimes, and genocide, and is dragging the region into repeated conflicts, as well as causing misery genocide with its expansionist colonial mentality. Neuer, whose organization monitors expressions of bias against Israel at the United Nations, wrote on X after the debate that the proposition that Israel was a greater threat to world stability than Iran struck him initially as deep satire. But then I recalled that 501 of their members voted to back the student chair who cheered the killing of Charlie Kirk, which gives us a good read on the moral clarity of this group. Our guest today actually is going to be a great assistance to us and the perfect person to comment on the accusation that took place at the Oxford Union on last Thursday. I am so pleased to welcome to the show today Andrew Tucker. He's the founding director of Thinc, and Thinc is an acronym, not with your brain, although it is with your brain, that stands for the Hague Initiative for International Cooperation, which is a global network of international law experts that challenges the misuse of international law to delegitimize Israel and advocates for its fair and balanced application to promote peace and security. He studied law in Australia, the UK, and the Netherlands, so he's an international man and has worked since 1988 as an advisor and consultant to private companies and governments. Based in the Netherlands, he was previously the executive director of Christians for Israel International, and he serves as the legal counsel for the European Coalition for Israel. It's an impressive resume for sure, and we're so honored to have you on Israel Matters today. Welcome, Andrew. Good to see you, my friend.
Stephen, good to be with you.
I'd love to hear your thoughts quickly, Andrew. Do you agree with the Oxford Union that Israel is a greater destabilizer than Iran in world politics?
Look, that's quite a statement, isn't it? In a sense, it is. And that's because nobody wants the Jews back in the land. There is, I think the Bible talks of this as being the great end times controversy. And so you could say it's the great disruptor, actually God intervening in this world is disrupting the plans of men. And we created a system in 1945, the UN system, to create peace and security in the world. And unfortunately, Jerusalem's getting in the way. And the world's, and particularly Islamic world, but also the secular humanist Western world, is very unhappy with this. So perhaps, in a way, Oxford is right.
Which is a little bit of, I see that, but it's one of those things that is, they're disrupting the world for the benefit of the world. So it's almost a catch-22 in the sense of recognizing evil being evil and good being good, and we live in that day and age where those two things have been flipped, haven't we? Well, we've been in touch almost a month ago, and I saw you a couple of weeks ago in Jerusalem. I want to thank you for coming on the show to help us process Trump's peace plan, what it entails, and if it's a good, viable plan. Now, this is 20 steps long, and we are still in step one, if you like, or phase one. And if I'm honest, I think the way forward seems even less clear than it did a month ago, and there's still lots of questions. Well, what is in point 34 to 20, and how does that affect? So can you summarize for us this 20-point plan, and do you think it's going to be workable? Is it wise? How is it going to affect the world?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the show. It's good to be with you. And we are living in a very, very interesting moment in history. So, look, this conflict's been going on for a long time in Gaza, really ever since Israel pulled out of the Gaza Strip in 2005. Of course, it goes way, way, way back, much longer than that. But when Hamas came to power in 2007, they kicked out Fatah and basically took over the Gaza Strip. And then after the attack, the invasion really of Israel on the 7th of October, 2 years ago, we've had a war. And I think everybody has kind of realized that this is a war with no end. For all the best intentions, Israel said it had two main war goals. One was to free the hostages, and the second was to eliminate Hamas as a military threat. And that's perfectly justified under international law to do that. But as the war went on, we've all realized that you can't simply eliminate Hamas. So President Trump steps in really in September. He got the Arab states together in the sidelines of the UN high-level week in New York to put together this plan, which he's obviously been thinking about for a long time. His big picture is the Abraham Accords. He wants to see a region, the Middle East, which is governed by his conception of peace, which is a series of agreements where America plays a central role, everybody's paying America a lot of money, and they're buying things from America. And it's through this system of transactional agreements, the Abraham Accords. And in order to do that, he knew there had to be a resolution of Gaza. So he came up with this idea, and it's really quite ingenious in a sense. He's managed to get the Arab states on board and other Islamic states like Indonesia to support the idea of getting rid of Hamas, sidelining Hamas, and reconstructing. And in order to get from A to B, he needed to create some kind of governance system. So the basic elements of the 20-point plan are, first of all, demilitarization, de-weaponization of Hamas, and the release of all the hostages. There's absolute both preconditions to any further steps. Secondly, the implementation of a so-called board, a governing board, which he will chair, and we don't quite know who else will be in this. Some other countries will be represented that will oversee a transition period. Secondly, this is all in phase 2. So this is all the future still to go. There'll be an interim kind of security arrangement, again, in which the military of various countries will participate. We don't know which ones yet, to create security. And then there will be the creation of an interim Palestinian government. And then finally, if all of that's in place, there'll be steps towards reconstruction and rebuilding and financing the reconstruction and rebuilding. Look, all of this rests on the demilitarization of Hamas. And let's not forget, this is an agreement it's not a written treaty. It's not like the Oslo Accords, which were negotiated over a long period of time and into the last dot and comma. And that's not the case here. It's really an oral agreement that he reached. He said he had Hamas on board. He said he had Israel on board and all the other countries. And now the Security Council is implementing that agreement in a Security Council resolution adopted this week, which China and Russia have abstained from voting. So it was adopted by 13 votes, and that purports to implement this plan. Now, Hamas is not giving up its weapons and refuses to give up its weapons and says it never agreed to give up its weapons. So it's controlling half of the Gaza Strip. Israel has withdrawn to about half, the northern, eastern and southern part of the Gaza Strip, with very few people. And Hamas is controlling the other 50% with 2 million Palestinians, most of whom are displaced. And so we have a kind of stagnation, a status quo, a kind of a ceasefire, but it's far from clear that anybody has a plan, let alone a workable plan, of how to get rid of Hamas. And this is the stumbling block.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, the ramifications of that are huge, because some of these suggested parties that would be involved there could be worse for Israel, in the sense of better the devil you know than the devil you don't. But I've seen articles this week, a headline that said Hamas rejects disarmament. This is obviously in phase 1. And that's one of the key components of the 20-point plan. And they claim that it was not part of the original talks. Who's telling the truth there? One can surmise. But within that as well, there's also been reports that have stated that Hamas is now stockpiling weapons in other countries. So this disarmament is not really something that is being followed through, is it? So moving to phase 2 seems like a non-starter.
Well, it's totally unrealistic, of course. Anybody who reads the Hamas Charter will realize that their end game is the annihilation of the Jewish state. And it's so deeply rooted in the psyche and the social geography of this place. and these people, Hamas still enjoys the support of, vast majority of the people in Gaza, and not to forget the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, Stephen, where Hamas is also extremely popular. So we come to the root of the problem, and that is a culture, a death culture, which is committed at any cost. They will sacrifice their own children to achieve their jihad Islamist objectives. And you don't simply sweep that aside.
I agree, but within the media mainstream, though, it seems like the tables are turned. It's almost been flipped in the sense that people are accusing Israel of committing genocide against the Palestinians. Is that really the case? And the other war crimes that during this October 7th, that is the language that is being put forward globally. You see it differently. And why is that? What are the constructs of genocide, and how is that really? It's an accusation that's false, really, isn't it? But
It is, yeah, it is. It's a terrible accusation because it's the mother of all crimes. You have war crimes, you have crimes against humanity, and then you have genocide. So this has all been building up. I think this was Hamas's strategy all along, was that they were going to get Israel before the International Court of Justice on a claim of committing genocide. So it's no surprise that South Africa is doing that. The ANC is an ally of Hamas. This has been cooked up for a long time, I think well before the 7th of October. The Genocide Convention is very clear, and it's all about intent. We have a war going on. War is not a nice thing, but it's justified in self-defense. Israel, and everybody agreed on the 8th of October. The vast majority of states agreed that Israel was fighting a legitimate war of self-defense against a hostile, aggressive enemy. The enemy is Hamas and all of the other parties dominating in the Gaza Strip. Now, it's a war that's cost a lot of lives for the reasons we know, because it's an asymmetric urban war in which Hamas is fighting from tunnels and underneath mosques and hospitals and all the rest of it. But that's an analysis that you go through in the international law of armed conflict. Is it proportionate? It's a whole different discussion. And we can argue for a long time about whether particular acts of Israel in the Gaza Strip have been in conflict with international law. Undoubtedly, in every war, both sides are committing infringements of international law, even perhaps war crimes. It's quite possible. But genocide requires an intention to destroy in whole or in part a people or group, right? So this is the core. Secondly, you have the acts involved, and they can be acts of all kinds of things. So killing people is a way of committing genocide, obviously, whether you kill them by starvation or whether you kill them by rockets or whether you kill them by any other kind of military force. So it's quite possible that you could be committing genocide in the context of an armed conflict, but only if you can prove that the intention of the use of force is to eliminate or destroy that people. And there's a case going on before the International Court of Justice in which the court has not in the slightest reached a conclusion on this question. People say, yes, well, the court said it's plausible that Israel is committing genocide. The court did not say that at all. The court said it's plausible that the Palestinians have rights that are protected under the Genocide Convention, but it's gone nowhere near making a serious analysis of genocide. So South Africa has submitted its claim. Israel will submit its counterclaim next March, and this will go on for a long time before the court makes a decision. It's the International Court of Justice that makes decisions on the application of the Genocide Convention. So we have to wait until the court makes that decision. Until then, the media have jumped onto this because, it's very convenient. And unfortunately, states and political parties and public people also jump onto it. But, beyond the reference to statements that were made by Netanyahu or the president on or after the 7th of October, nobody can point to a serious case of Israel having the intent to destroy the Palestinian people. I mean, if Israel really wanted to do that, Gaza would have been wiped out long ago.
Yeah, they could have done
So
it. They could have done it on October 8th, couldn't they, really? I mean, they have the
yeah,
capacity and the propensity to, but they've been
of course.
so meticulously careful in regard
Yeah.
to how they have gone about securing and the release of the hostages and minimizing civilian casualties. So is this what motivated you, this whole scenario, to co-found Think, or is there another element to it? And what gap did you see in the international law discourse around Israel?
Well, it goes back to you might remember 2016, at the end of 2016, the last days of the Obama administration, the Security Council adopted a resolution which the United States abstained on voting. The United States has always voted against anti-Israel resolutions. They abstained this time. Resolution saying that settlements are a what's the word? Not fragrant.
Flagrant,
Flagrant.
the L in
So
there.
much. Yeah. I always get that one mixed up. A flagrant violation of international law. And that for us was a trigger. I've been looking at this for a long time, even long before this, about how international law is being manipulated. It's used by everybody, and there's nothing wrong with that. But when it becomes a weapon, and when the courts become a weapon to support a military campaigns, we could see this coming. We realize there's a need for a dedicated think tank looking seriously at the way law is used and misused in relation to Israel and the Middle East more broadly, because I think it's undermining not only Israel, but it's undermining our whole legal system, the credibility of our legal system. It's got to the point where the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court are supposed to be bastions of justice, and they're being completely manipulated to support a campaign which is to eliminate the Jewish state of Israel. And at the deepest, that's what moves me, is I want to defend the right of the Jewish people to a homeland in safety. And we cannot have our legal system being used to, it's not only to criticize Israel, but to actually delegitimize it and to demonize it and ultimately to destroy it. I think this is one of the greatest tragedies, but really travesties of justice of the modern era, is this attack on a sovereign state of the United Nations, the only place on earth that the Jewish people can hope to be safe, and we're threatening to destroy it. This is why we set up Think, to have a serious look at these issues and to gather lawyers together to push back against an enormous tsunami of you have to think about how well funded the other side is. I've been in these processes in these courts, and all of these states, the majority of UN member states, collected in the Islamic group and the Arab group and the African groups, and they're massively funded and they have armies of lawyers. And then the tiny little state of Israel is defending itself. And I think, well, where are the rest of us? Why are the other states not standing with them? And it's too little. And what we're trying to do is to build the legal case, to create the teams of lawyers, and to mobilize other states, like we've done with Fiji and the Pacific Islands, and we're helping other states to really get involved instead of sitting on the sideline or on the fence, as we've all done, particularly in Europe. And I'm sorry to say the UK's played a pretty abysmal role, but so has my own country, Australia, in recent years. It's unacceptable. It's
Yeah.
totally unacceptable.
Yeah, and so I mean, there's so many questions that come up out of this. Where do you believe the international legal discussions around Israel have become detached from on the ground realities? And you've mentioned a couple of times the UN and the ICC also plays into this. What should their role be internationally? Are they fulfilling the role that is required of them, or are they manipulating the authority that they have in the global public discourse?
Well, I think they are being manipulated. So quite clearly, this is what we call lawfare, and it's a deliberate strategy. You know, and at the end of the day, it's all about whether or not the Jews have a right to a state. This is the core of it. Do the Jews, the Jewish people, have a right to a Jewish state under international law? And ever since Israel was created on the 14th of May, 1948, the question has been hanging around. And sadly, in many Jewish minds, it's been a question. You know, the most rabid criticizers and condemners of Israel tend to be Jewish people themselves. And unfortunately, lawyers are the worst. You remember what Jesus said about the lawyers? You know, what wasn't lawyers? You know, lawyers are always getting in the way, and but you know, there is this question of is Israel a legitimate state, and people still have this question. You know, we don't have that question about any other state in the world. Nobody questions whether Syria is. I mean, it's the most failed state on earth potentially. But we don't question whether it exists, and we do question whether the Jewish state has a right to exist. And I think there's been a lack of clarity, both within Israel but outside Israel. The UN, because it's a system that operates by majorities, ever since the 1960s, particularly under the Soviet influence, there's been this idea that it's an illegitimate colonial enterprise. It's the last vestige, if you like, of colonialism that needs to be destroyed. A bit like South Africa needed to be, at least the apartheid regime. This idea of a Jewish state has gone in deeply into the UN system. And I could talk a long time about this, how that has happened. And through that, over the last 2 decades, it's reached the international courts. And this is where, in my view, the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, and the ICC, International Criminal Court, but there are many others, and particularly the UN Human Rights Council, have been completely manipulated to push this narrative that the Jews do not belong in Palestine.
So do you
So
think
it's
that?
not about a two-state solution. It's not about borders or boundaries or territory. I really think it's about an existential question of Israel's existence.
So do you think that is going to frame and shape future international law norms, what the ICJ and the ICC are discussing at this present moment in time? And has the legal landscape changed more rapidly since October 7th, or is it been just a gradual build? What are the circumstances you
I
now
think,
see
I
on
think
that?
so it's been a gradual build-up over the decades. 2012 was a watershed moment when Palestine was granted UN non-member observer state status in the UN, a complete absurdity. This entity, which is not a state, and everybody knew it wasn't a state, but it's been called a state. Having become a state or recognized as a state, it's gone on to enter all kinds of treaties like the Genocide Convention, like the ICC Rome Statute. So it is now a party that can appear as a state before the international courts. So since 2012, that's the game they have played, and they've been very open about it, that this was their objective. They never wanted the Oslo Accords. They never wanted a two-state solution. Arafat was clear about it. Abbas has been clear about it. He's going to use the international legal system to achieve the PLO's objective, which is the removal of the Jewish state to this very day. So the law hasn't changed, but it's being used in a very particular way in relation to Israel. There's no other state in the world which is called an occupying power like this. There's no other state in the world where the court says that the occupation has become illegal. There's no other state in the world where it's being accused of genocide in the context of a defensive war. So there's a whole range of things. There's no other state in the world where war crimes are being committed on the territory of a state that doesn't exist, Palestine. So these are all anomalies and use of the legal system, which at the end of the day undermines the legal system and makes it a complete parody of itself.
Yeah,
And that's why I think the credibility of
thorough.
these courts the courts are, just a final remark, the credibility of the courts, in my view, is being, but very few people see this, unfortunately, because they are the international courts, and people say if the court says something, then it must be true.
Because we based our society on a legal system that functions and operates with a moral clarity and a moral compass that seems to have been eroded and removed, and as a result, the implication is it's affecting the way decisions are being made. And I just want to kind of turn to you and your personal view in this situation. What are the most urgent legal issues that Israel faces today? What are the ones that need to be addressed urgently?
Look, I would say at the end of the day, Israel needs to be absolutely clear about its territory, right? All of this has happened because since 1967, Israel has obfuscated and been very, very ambiguous about its claims to Judea and Samaria, and even to Jerusalem, to be quite honest with you. They reunited Jerusalem in 67. It's become the undivided capital of the state of Israel, but the rest of the world doesn't accept that. Really, even the Vatican doesn't accept that Jerusalem belongs to Israel. So there's a lot of work that has to be done to explain Israel's position and to assert it. And my personal view, I'm coming more and more of the view that a vacuum of sovereignty, like we have in Judea and Samaria and in Gaza, is creating chaos. It's opened the door for the enemy to move in and claim sovereignty. And this has been a big mistake in my view. And I think the only way that Israel will be able to secure itself is if it is the sovereign, with all that entails. And it's a very difficult question, I understand. I'm not quite sure how that has to happen, but territory needs a sovereign. We can't have territory where there's ambiguity and absence of government, because the terrorists move in, those who want to, and of course there's a religious element to all of this as well. So I think it's going to come down to that, quite frankly. The Temple Mount, East Jerusalem, Judea and Samaria, and full circle, the Bible tells us that that's the big stumbling block at the end of the age, isn't it? So in my view, it's no surprise
Yeah.
But I think legally, this is probably the big issue that everybody's walking around and nobody wants to address it.
So
And I see a lot of
yeah.
confusion in Israel.
Yeah, just so the question is, okay, from your personal experience and your worldview, your views on Israel and international law, what is the solution? How does this get resolved? I know there's an ideal reality. We're seeing circling back to the 20-point plan. It appears doomed to fail from the front end because you don't have two partners for peace. So, what and how do we get to the point where there is a solution on the ground? And as you've rightly alluded to, the scriptures do talk about in Zechariah about Jerusalem being divided right at the very end of what the biblical account is talking about, and that being the place of contention. So how do we move forward legally? No, I'm not talking kind of biblically or anything else. Is there a
Yeah.
way to move forward utilizing ICC, ICJ, UN, or is it a non-starter and this complex issue continues to roll on it in its full complexity in the days ahead as well? What would
Look,
you
I
say?
think if you want to approach legally, then you have to apply international law fairly and objectively. And I think if you apply international law fairly and objectively to Israel, like we do to any other state, you come out in a very different place than we're coming out at now. I don't think the Palestinians have a right to a state. I think they have uh, look, even before 1948, they rejected every possibility of a Palestinian state. So they've never wanted one, and they've never claimed one, actually. What they claim is Palestine from the river to the sea. So we have to be very clear. International law recognizes the existence of the Jewish state of Israel was created in 1948, full stop. What are the boundaries of that state? Well, there are rules about that, and we apply those rules in every other situation. And the very simple rule is that the boundaries of the mandate for Palestine, in principle, should have become the boundaries of the state of Israel. Right? There could have been two states before 1948. The Arabs rejected every solution, okay? So the state of Israel was created. What were its borders? I think they were the borders, the boundaries of the mandates. So that's at least everything up to the Jordan River. Let's put aside the question of Jordan and Transjordan, right?
Sure.
That's international law. And then everything else is secondary. You know, do you have a right of self-defense? Can you defend your borders? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that's where I think we're making the fundamental mistake. And we have one judge on the court now who's, for the first time in history, making that argument, Judge Sebutindi from Uganda. And she's doing it because the argument finally was put to the court by certain states, including Fiji, who we were assisting. And that's because Israel has never put that case strongly itself. So what we're trying to do is say, apply the law. Now, is that going to solve the conflict? No, it will not solve the conflict because, first of all, the courts are probably never going to accept that argument. And secondly, even if they did, it's not going to change the minds of Hamas and Iran and Qatar and the Muslim Brotherhood who are fighting for control over sacred Muslim territory. So I think, personally, I don't see any solution except a military one. This war will only end when one side wins. Sadly.
It's the nature of war throughout history and territory as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
The unfolding of it and the so final question for you. And I'm aware we talked about Israel's kind of legal status. If there was one widespread misconception, misunderstanding globally regarding Israel's legal status, what would that one misconception that you would want to challenge and correct be, and why?
I would say it's the claim that Israel is a mere occupying power.
Okay. Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
This has been a very, very clever marketing tool to use the legal concept of occupation to undermine the legitimacy not only of Israel's presence in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, Gaza, but even Israel's legitimacy itself. That, the idea of an occupying power has sort of overtones of colonialism and so forth. And this is not the law of occupation. It's a whole discussion in itself, but it's been a brilliant, and Israel itself played into that. And I have to say this, in 1967, they decided to treat Judea and Samaria as occupied territory. And so this whole paradigm, I think, which has undermined Israel's legitimacy, is the core error, I think, which needs to be strongly pushed back against.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your time and expertise, Andrew. I appreciate it greatly. How can viewers find you online and support the work of Thinc?
So obviously you can go to our website, www.thinc.info, THINC.info. And we're on social media. You'll find us The Hague Initiative for International Cooperation, The Hague Initiative, Israel, The Hague, you'll find us. So please do come and follow us on social media, visit our website, sign up for our publications, and we'd love to be in touch. And you can find me personally and reach out if you have any questions or you want us to speak in your, whether it's in your church or in your community. We're training up people to do this work, and we'd love to be of assistance to you.
Well, thank you. And also, friends, you can check out the information, and I'll put the links for Thinc in the description below. Keep up the important work you're doing at Thinc, and we'd love to have you back again soon, Andrew. Thank you for your time. So, friends, as we wrap up and look at a few other bits and pieces today, my wife and I recently attended the Christian Media Summit in Jerusalem with Christian media professionals from all around the world who had the opportunity to see the situation on the ground in Israel firsthand. And during the course of the conference, we had the privilege to meet the Deputy Foreign Minister Sharren Haskel, and during her address to the summit, she read a fascinating scripture passage that she felt foreshadowed the events of October 7th. This was something that she read and looked at just a few weeks after October 7th had taken place. Let's take a look.
For Jews and Christians alike, this place is sacred, not because of borders on a map, but because the covenant written into our scripture and our souls. In difficult times, like many others here in this room, I turn to the Bible to find strength and answers. On the day of October 7th, the day of the massacre, I was in Kibbutz Chukuk. My sister lives there, and it's named after the prophet Habakkuk that you may know. 2 weeks later, I realized I don't know much about this prophet. So I decided to open the book. Okay? I was reading the first chapter, and I was shook to my core because I understood this is the beginning of the historical time that our prophets have been warning and guiding us to. It gave me strength and understanding of our challenges, our strength, and our weaknesses as the people of Israel. I want to share with you what I saw in my eyes in Hebrew. Reading the first chapter, and I translated it for you from a simple Hebrew to a simple English, not through Greek and Latin and everything. And because I want this to give you that strength and that understanding as well of what we see through our Israeli and the Hebrew eyes. So it goes like this. I begged for the help of God, and you will not hear me. I scream Hamas, The prophet could use many words for violence. It's translated for you in English to violence. But the word in Hebrew is Hamas. He mentioned Hamas 4 times just in the first chapter. Didn't choose any other word. Okay? So, I scream Hamas, and you did not save. Why would you show me the sight of injustice and slavery to witness at, and Hamas violent looting? For there will be feud and contention to bear and endure. On this the Bible may disappear, and justice will never prevail. Now listen to this. He talks about the justice, because it will be the evil that will crown the saint. And because of that, justice will be distorted. Think about the ICC, ICJ. Who crowns those judges? Who chooses them? And their verdict, is it political or is this justice? He spoke about it. Listen to this. Look at the foreigners and see them puzzled to their end, because activists are working in modern time. It is like an unimaginable tale. God will erect and raise the Kashdim. This is modern Iraq and Iran area, the biblical one, and it was Iran. The bitter and hasty Gentile who will walk to the regions of Israel to inherit the towns that don't belong to him. Dreadful and horrible is his being. His law and his hatred will come out. Now listen to this. His horses are lighter than tigers. What does the prophet mean? His horses are lighter than tigers. Who speaks Hebrew? Nitzan, where are you? You've been guiding them. What is tigers in Hebrew? Tigers. Namer. Okay. What is namerim? What do we use namerim for? Namerim. It's an armed vehicle. It's the armed vehicle that you saw being destroyed on the 7th of October is called namerim. And it tells us his horses are lighter than tigers. So when you read that in Hebrew, and you remember the motorcycles, the donkeys, the horses, Hamas came in, and you read namerim, which is an armed Israeli vehicle, you have that image of destruction of the 7th of October. They are sharper than the evening wolf. What does this prophet mean? Who know what is our Southern Command symbol? Okay, sharper than the evening wolf. This is the symbol of Israeli Southern Command, who was in charge of the 7th of October. They were sharper than the evening wolf. The horsemen committed crime. They come from far away. They will fly in like vultures rushing to devour. How do you describe 2,000 years ago paragliders shooting at festival goers? All will join Hamas violence and aim forward. Who joined them? Hezbollah, Iraq, the Houthis, Iran. Everybody will join their violence. Now listen. All will join Hamas and aim forward. He will collect hostages like sand. He will mock leaders, and they will play with dukes like pawns to their will. Each fortress will erode and accumulate dirt, and they will be trapped. So that can break you, but that can give you strength. Understanding we live in historical times. The times that the prophets were talking about, the times that we were warned about. And it's not just our mission, this is your mission as well. These are painful words. They are a lament, a warning, and for those who listen with the ears of history, a call for moral clarity.
If you want to hear her full address, it's in the description below. But that in and of itself was a very profound. As I sat there, I said to Melissa, my ears deceive me. We've got the Deputy Foreign Minister of a sovereign state quoting and explaining what took place on October 7th. through the book of Habakkuk in the scriptures, and her understanding of that coming from a visual visit to her sister in Kukuk, which is one of the kibbutzes, as she mentioned there. It's an astonishing passage of scripture that she read, and she feels that that foreshadowed the events of October 7th. That's why it's so important that we do these Hebrew word studies each week as part of the Israel Matters podcast, because there is so much more depth and richness and understanding that comes from the original language. And today, as we wrap up our time together, we're going to look at Nachah, which means to guide. It's so important in these times to be led and guided by the Lord. There is a little phrase in Deuteronomy 32 verse 12 that is key for us. The Lord alone guided him. Do you believe that the Lord can guide you through life, through decisions big and small? Yes, God has granted free will to men, but can we choose to submit our will to God's, making ourselves available to his service and asking him to lead us to his best for us? Recently, our family was at a crossroads, making big decisions about foster care placements, job opportunities, and a house move. There are seemingly smaller decisions too, like whether to book a certain trip or which classes our children should take next year in school, and seemingly even smaller decisions each day about meals, schedules, entertainment, recreation. And in each of these areas, I believe that God sees, provides, cares, and knows the best way forward like a good shepherd. Especially as we seek to be good stewards of the Lord and to understand the signs of the times, the news cycles that constantly bombard us, it's so important to be guided by the Lord as we make sense of what we see and discern what is taking place personally, nationally, globally, and in every sphere. We need to be those who are aware. Well, Nachah is a Hebrew verb which primarily refers to leading or guiding, typically in the context of the Lord himself guiding his people. It signifies directing someone on a journey or path, and that can be spiritually or physically, and the guidance can be literal, such as leading through a physical terrain, or the guidance can be metaphorical, where moral or spiritual direction are offered. Sometimes, according to context, it can also convey the idea of bestowing, bringing, governing, instructing, straightening, directing, or transporting, particularly with regard to into new lands. You see, God's desire and ability to guide his people is a theme repeated across the breadth of the scriptures. For example, Eliezer asked the Lord for guidance as he journeyed to find a wife for Isaac. The second half of Genesis 24:27b says, "As for me, the Lord has led Nachah me on the journey to the house of my master's relatives." Exodus 13 verse 17 shows us that God led the Israelites on a certain route through the wilderness on purpose. It says, God did not lead Nachah them on the road through the Philistine country, though that was shorter, for God said, if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. In biblical times, the idea of guidance was closely tied to the relationship between God and his people. The Israelites frequently sought divine direction. The image of God as a good shepherd guiding his flock is a prominent theme in the Hebrew scriptures, mirroring the pastoral culture of that era. For example, the Lord was faithful to clearly guide his people in the wilderness. And we read in Exodus 13, verse 21, by day the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide, Nachah, them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light so that they could travel by day or night. I can ask God to lead us like the psalmist does in Psalm 31, verse 3. There is safety and security with him as our guide, since you are my rock and my fortress. For the sake of your name, lead, Nachah, and guide me. God guides us, not just for our own sake, but for the glory and reputation of his name. Psalm 23, verse 3, familiar to many of you, reads, He refreshes my soul, he guides, he nachahs me along the right paths for his name's sake. Primarily, God's instruction comes through the scripture. God will never lead us in a way that contradicts his own word. His guidance may come through a Bible verse that stands out, or is repeated to us multiple times from various sources. It may come through an inner peace or a check in our spirit or even a still small voice of prompting from the Holy Spirit. It may come through circumstances of doors that open or close. It could come through godly counsel from a pastor, a friend, or a relative. See, God confirms he can use people as the instrument of his guidance. We find that in Psalm 77, verse 20, where it says, "You led Nachah, your people like a flock, by the hand of Moses and Aaron." So he used man to guide his people. The Lord capably guides not only individuals, but entire nations. And Psalm 67, verse 4 says, May the nations be glad and sing for joy, for you rule the peoples with equity and govern Nachah, the nations of the earth. So God is involved in the governing of nations even to this day. You see, his instruction is always available. Isaiah 58, verse 11 reads and tells us, "The Lord will guide, Nachah, you always. He will satisfy your needs in a sun-scorched land and will strengthen your frame. You will be like a well-watered garden, like a spring whose waters never fail." And it is such good news that we don't need to succumb to ungodly fear when he is our shepherd and guide. According to Psalm 78:53, he Nachad them safely so they were unafraid, but the sea engulfed their enemies. And Psalm 129 verse 10 reminds us that his guidance gives comfort and strength as he wisely and graciously directs us with his own hand. Even there, your hand will guide Nachami, your right hand will hold me fast. We all face so many choices in life. Let us resolve to ask for and rely on God's guidance in every area. What comfort and reassurance that God himself is with us to help us navigate this life and will ultimately Nachah us to our heavenly home with him. I love Exodus 15, verse 13. "In your unfading love, you will lead Nachah, the people you have redeemed. In your strength, you will guide them to your holy habitation." Lord, lead and guide us as we seek after you and your kingdom and your righteousness. Friends, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments on today's show. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share. It helps us get the message of Israel Matters out further and wider, because Israel matters to God, it should matter to us. Israel Matters is a listener-funded show, and you can find info in the episode description below about how you can partner with Israel Matters to help make it possible for us to continue making free content like this podcast. Let's stand together and use our voice and influence to combat anti-Semitism and to point people to the Lord and to his word. Thank you for joining today. I'm Stephen Briggs, and this is Israel Matters.